All right. This is the APA Style Writing Center workshop, and I'm Misty Woolard, the Writing Center coordinator. If you ever have to email with the Writing Center or um, ever call us on the phone, you're probably going to talk to me. So it's great that you're here. I'm excited to tell you guys a little bit more about APA. So we're going to talk about APA style today, and we're going to cover about 5 different things in APA. We're going to cover how APA relates to other citation styles you may have used in the past. We're going to talk about why we cite sources and how we cite sources. We're going to talk about some basic formatting requirements of APA. We're going to talk about the link between in-text citation and our reference lists. And then we're also going to talk about how to effectively approach an APA styled paper. Now that's a lot to cover. If you guys have questions, please feel free to write them in the chat log. I probably will not answer them until the end of our session today, but definitely post them in there. Or at the end, we'll have time where we can open up our microphones and we can all talk together. So it's really up to you which one you prefer. I probably won't address questions until the end because what I've found is that I usually cover a lot of them. So we've got a lot to do, so let's get started. What is APA? APA stands for the American Psychological Association, and the style rules were created by the American Psychological Association. You can find them in an APA manual. The manual provides guidelines for writing as well as proper documentation of sources. The first APA manual was published in 1952, and APA puts out a new manual every couple of years. We are currently following the 6th edition. A question that I hear a lot from students is, why do we use APA at Full Sail? And the answer is, we use it because it is the citation style that is used in business, and it accommodates the wide range of disciplines that all of our students study. You might have used other citation styles in the past. A lot of high schools use MLA, or maybe you used Chicago. But APA is what we use at Full Sail because, again, it kind of covers that umbrella that all of our departments will, hopefully when you graduate, be using. So a couple of things to be aware of with Full Sail and APA is you will be required to use APA style for any research assignment that requires citation throughout your education here. Every class has at least one assignment that requires library research, so all your course instructors who ask you to cite your sources are expecting you to use APA. And because APA is a school-wide approach to citation, it makes sense to learn it early and to get refreshers as you go throughout your education here. Why do we cite sources? There are a couple of different reasons. One, when we cite sources, our readers are able to distinguish between our ideas and information that we've taken from other places. That means that we as writers get credit for our own ideas, and we give appropriate credit to the ideas of others. Another reason that we cite sources is if your paper lacks citations, readers may assume that all of the ideas belong to the writer. And if ideas in the paper belong to an outside source and have not been properly cited, this could be considered plagiarism. And the third reason is when we cite sources, we also show that we've taken the time to study and understand the research and documentation process. And utilizing and citing research allows us to support our own ideas and make our arguments more credible. I think that that last point is really important because if you don't know, if you haven't done any research, but you're expecting me to take you as an expert, to believe that you're an expert, that can kind of be a hard pill to swallow for a lot of readers. So that idea that you've taken the time to familiarize yourself with these concepts through research can be very, very important for your credibility. All right, let's talk about what needs to be cited next. Any information that comes from an outside source needs to be cited. This can include quotes or paraphrases or summaries from an article or a blog post. It can include images and audio, video game elements, computer software, and really any other type of media that you might have used in a presentation or a paper. Let's break down how we cite things, and let's start with kind of the most common one that we see in papers, which is the quote. A quote is just a word-for-word passage from an outside source. Again, you have to cite all of the quotes that you use in a paper. What is a paraphrase? A paraphrase is when you take a fact or an idea from an outside source and you put it into your own words. Now, paraphrasing is actually kind of hard to do. And the reason that it's hard to do is that often when we paraphrase, we follow the same pattern that the original quote had, and we just use synonyms. We replace their words with a synonym for their word. And that isn't really a paraphrase. When you paraphrase something, you want to completely rework it into your own words. You don't want it to mirror the original. And again, that's a really hard skill to learn, but if you want to learn it, the Writing Center is a good place to come and talk that through. You also have to cite paraphrases in your work, and we'll talk a little bit more about the specifics of how it differs from citing a quote. And then the third thing that we see pretty regularly in papers are summaries. And when you summarize, you put the main idea of a piece of writing into your own words. And this is different from a paraphrase because in a paraphrase, you're putting a specific idea or a fact from a piece of writing into your own words. Summaries also must be cited. All right, what about audio, video, images, and other media? All of these must be cited if you're using them in your work. There are two different ways to cite media. One citation style to use when you discuss media in a paper, and another citation style to use when you include media in a presentation. We're going to talk about those both in just a minute, so don't worry if you're still confused on how to do that. What does not need to be cited? We don't need to cite common knowledge, but then, of course, the follow-up question to that is, what's common knowledge? Common knowledge, knowledge is considered common when it is available in a variety of sources or generally accepted facts, such as pollution is bad for the environment or writing is a process. You can usually determine that something is common knowledge if you can find the same information presented in at least 5 credible sources that is not documented. So I could find you 5 sources from credible places that do not document the idea that writing is a process, meaning they don't link it back to anywhere else. So that idea has become kind of common knowledge within the industry and within teaching guidelines of writing. This is an important distinction, so pay attention to this idea. If you read an article and you then remember a fact from that article, the fact is not considered common knowledge. You still have to cite the article. So let's say you are a huge Bob Dylan fan, and you're going to talk about the fact that Bob Dylan just won a Nobel Prize. That might feel like common knowledge. It's not. You would still need to cite somewhere that Bob Dylan had won the Nobel Prize. You could go to the Nobel website, or you could find an article in the New York Times or something like that, but you would need to cite that idea still, even though you've seen it in a lot of different places. It won't actually be considered common knowledge. Other things that don't need to be cited include findings from preliminary experimentation, and this just means experiments that you conducted yourself. And then original audio, video, or images that you have created. I will say this, when in doubt, cite. All right, in the next section, we're going to get down to kind of the bare bones, the basics of APA, and we're going to talk about some formatting requirements. There are 3 major elements of an APA paper that you will use often. The three elements are your title page, your in-text citations, and your reference list entries. There are other elements that aren't always needed, and we'll cover those a little bit as well. But again, those three major ones that you should really familiarize yourself with and become comfortable with are the title page, the in-text citations, and the reference list entry. All right, let's talk about the title page. This is what your title page should look like. At the end of the session, I will give you a link to a YouTube video that will walk you through the process of setting up the title page in Word. I don't want to bore you with how to do that right now. Plus, you honestly probably won't remember it when you actually need it. I have set up a title page probably 800 times, and to this day, I still sometimes go, wait, how do I make my running head? So this YouTube video, you can bookmark it and then just pull it up when you actually need to make a title page. And like I said, I'll put a link to that video in the chat and just at the end of our presentation. All right, so let's look at the elements that must be included on the title page. Every title page has a header. The words running head followed by a colon and the title of your paper in all caps. You'll notice that running head is not in all caps, but the title of the paper is. The page number should appear flush right in the header, and then the running head and the title of your paper appear flush left. You'll have a different header on your title page than you do on the rest of your document. On the rest of the pages, you will drop the words running head and the colon, and it just ends up being the title of your paper in all caps. This is, that's a mistake that I see pretty regularly. Students either don't have the running head or running head, the words running head appear on each of their pages. Centered about halfway down the page, the title of your paper will appear on the first line, and then your name gets its own line, and finally the name of your school is the last line. All right, this is one of those extras that we sometimes get in APA papers, and that's the abstract. You may or may not be required to include an abstract in your document. Usually abstracts are only included with longer research papers, such as a thesis paper. When required, the abstract is just a brief summary of your paper that immediately follows the title page. And again, if your instructors expect you to include an abstract, they will let you know that in the assignment. So the abstract should be double-spaced. It should include the page header with the title of the paper in all caps, flush left, and the page number flush right. You'll notice that, again, that running head has disappeared. The word abstract should be centered. There will be no bolds. You don't need it capitalized, or I'm sorry, you don't need it italicized, underlined, or in quotation marks. And then the abstract itself should be no more than 150 to 250 words. This may vary based on assignment requirements, but that's a good rule of thumb. That's kind of a good place to start. And then the other thing you might include in your abstract are keywords. You don't have to. If you do include keywords, indent like you're starting a new paragraph, and then you want to type keywords in italics, and then a colon, and then the keywords themselves. And again, guys, just remember an abstract is not needed for every APA paper. If your instructors want you to have an abstract, they will let you know. All right, the next two important parts of the APA paper are in-text citations and our reference list. These are the doozies. These are the ones that are going to take up the most amount of your time. So APA style calls for both, and you can't have one without the other. They're kind of like milk and cookies. In-text citations are used in the body of the document. An in-text citation specifies which source a particular piece of information, like a quote or a paraphrase or a summary, comes from. The reference list appears at the end of the document and gives detailed publication information about each source cited in the document. Now, the idea here is is that if I'm reading your paper and I come across a quote, the in-text citation says, this is a quote, this is where it came from. Awesome, right? The other thing it does is it tells me where I can find more information in the reference list. So I look at I would have the author's last name or something like that, and I can go to the reference list and find that easily. And then the reference list would allow me to actually look up the research that you've done. So if you've read, 3 articles about nuclear fission, I can then go and read those 3 articles as well. If we didn't have in-text citations, we wouldn't be able to tell which ideas in a paper came from an outside source and which ideas came from the author. And if we didn't have the reference list, we wouldn't be able to find the references used throughout the paper. So again, in APA style, you need both. I'm going to pause here for just a second, and I just want to let you guys know that in the next few sections, we're going to go through a lot of specific detail about formatting for in-text citations and a reference list. Don't feel like you have to memorize everything I say. It's a ton of information, and I'm going to show you resources as well that you can bookmark so that you can find the same info again when you need it. This is the secret about APA style and every other citation style. Nobody remembers all the rules. If you guys come to the Writing Center and you ask me a really specific question about how to cite a really specific source, I might have to look it up. Because if I haven't done it in a while, I don't remember. Now, the good thing is that I'm very familiar with the basics, which means if you bring your paper to the Writing Center, I'm likely to realize when you have made a mistake because I'm familiar. So that's what we really want you guys to get to, that same level where you might not have the answer immediately, but you know that you have a question. You know that, I know that you don't cite a book the same way you cite an image. So I have to look that up to make sure that I've gotten them both right. Then again, we want to provide you the resources you need so that you can find that information. All right, so that's kind of my pep talk about if you're feeling overwhelmed. So we're going to talk about in-text citations first. What should the in-text citation look like? The format for an in-text citation can vary depending on whether the information cited is a quotation, a summary, or a paraphrase. We'll cover it all. There are 2 basic formats for in-text citations, and this is true whether you're citing a quote, a summary, or a paraphrase. So the first example is a quote from a Writing Center blog post. And we've actually used the author's last name in the sentence. We've said, according to Chapman. We've put the date in a parentheses immediately after the author's name, and then the page number, which is actually a paragraph number, comes at the end of the sentence. We don't have a page number because it's an online blog, so we've used the paragraph number instead. When we put the author's name in the sentence like this, it's called a signal phrase. And then the second example is another way that we can create an in-text citation. We don't have a signal phrase. Instead, we've put all of that information at the very end of the sentence, at the end of the quote. But you'll notice that both of them include the author's last name, the year of publication, and the paragraph or page number. Either of these formats is acceptable, and that is the information that needs to be included when you are citing a basic quote. So we're going to take a little bit of a closer look. In APA style, there are 2 formats for citing quotes in text. One format is for quotes under 40 words, and another format is for quotes over 40 words. This is an example of a quote that's under 40 words. We have used a signal phrase, and you'll also notice that there are quotation marks surrounding the actual quote. We have the author's last name, the year of publication, and a page or paragraph number. And then the period, this is an important rule, appears at the very end of the citation, meaning it doesn't appear at the end of the sentence, it appears at the end of our citation. All right. So if the quote is more than 40 words, it should look like this example. Things to notice. We have to use a signal phrase. If your quote is more than 40 words, use a signal phrase. In this example, we've used Chapman 2012 states. We don't need quotation marks, but the quote starts on a new line and you indent it. This is a strange APA rule. In this format and only this format, the period appears at the end of the sentence rather than the end of the citation. I don't really know why, but that is the rule. We haven't done it here, but just also a thing to bear in mind is if you omit words, phrases, or sentences within a quote, you have to use an ellipses. All right, so we've looked at quotes. Let's talk about paraphrases. In this example, we're citing a paraphrase. We used an idea from the article we're citing, but we didn't use a word-for-word quote. We put the idea into our own words. So we still need to include the author's last name as well as the year of publication. But with paraphrases, you don't cite the page number. And obviously you don't use quotation marks because we haven't actually quoted anyone. And then let's look at summaries. Again, we still need to cite the author's last name and year of publication, but not the page number. If you put a page number into a summary or a paraphrase, it's not incorrect, but you just don't need it. Now we're going to talk about some tricky in-text citations. Sometimes our resources don't include the information we need to create an in-text citation. For instance, maybe there is no author's name, there's no date, or there's no page number. So how do we handle those sources? If there's no author listed, we use the first few relevant words in the title of the article or the book in place of the author's last name. The title should be in quotation marks. So again, we have the title or article, the title of the article or the book, the year of publication, and the page number. And a thing to remember is if you are using the title of article or book, this would reflect in your reference list, meaning the first thing in your reference entry for this specific resource should be the same title that appears in your in-text citation. And then if there is no specified or specific author listed, but the information came from an organization or a company's website, for example, a study by the Food and Drug Administration or a quarterly earnings report from a company like AT&T, you can actually use the organization or name of the company instead of an author's name. If we don't have a date, we would use the abbreviation ND, which means no date. And this is, excuse me, you guys, this is showing you a signal phrase according to Thomas, and then the parentheses, ND, and then you just continue. Or if you were just using the end parenthetical citation. And then often page numbers, if we're citing a quotation from an online source, we won't have page numbers. So we should cite the paragraph number where we found the quote instead. So for example, if the quote was in the second paragraph, you would cite paragraph 2. And then again, just a reminder, if you're citing a paraphrase or a summary, you don't need the page number, so you also wouldn't have to include the paragraph number. All right, so those are kind of the basics of in-text citations. Now we're going to talk about the reference list, which is the third major element of an APA paper. Let's talk about formatting requirements. Every page needs a header. So again, the header should look like the rest of the headers in the paper, with the exception of the title page. And it has the title of your paper in all caps, flush left, and the page number, flush right. References should be centered at the top of the page. Again, it doesn't need to be bolded or underlined or italicized. And then your sources should be listed alphabetically by author's last name or by alphabetically by article if you're using, the article title. If an author has more than one work, organize it by date of publication, and the reference list should be double-spaced with no extra spaces between sources. Now, this is an odd thing. Every line after the first line of each entry should be indented. So if your source takes up, 2, 3, 4, however many lines, that second, third, fourth, however many extra lines should be indented. That's called a hanging indent. Again, when I post the resource for how to create the title page, I'll also provide a YouTube link on how to set up a hanging indent in Word. And then electronic sources should include clickable URLs, as you can see here. All right, so let's take a closer look at reference list entries. The first step in deciding how to cite a source is to figure out what type of source you have. Is your source a book? Is it a magazine? Is it a newspaper article or an article from a journal? Is it a personal interview, a YouTube video, or some other type of print and electronic source? APA has specific rules for citing different kinds of sources. Each entry, regardless of the type of source, will contain an author's name if it's known, the title of the work, the publication information, but this is where that publication information changes based on the type of source we have. So it's important to identify the type of source and then look for an example of how to cite that particular source. For this example, we're looking at a reference entry for a blog. However, if we were citing a book or an online newspaper or a video game, again, the citation would have a slightly different format. The most important thing here is become familiar with the basic format and then look for an example, in the APA manual or on an online resource of your specific type of source. So let's talk about the basic entry. We have the author by last name and then the first initial of the first name. In this example, we have a single author, but your source may have multiple authors or no author or an organization as the author. The date in parentheses comes after the author. In this case, we're citing a blog, so we need the complete date, including the year, month, and day. If you were citing a book, you would only have the year. Again, that's a time to check examples for your specific type of source. Notice that only the first letter of the first word in the book or article title is capitalized, and every word that comes after the first word begins with a lowercase letter. Proper nouns are the exception, as are any words that come after a colon, such as, focus on APA, colon. Proper nouns are always capitalized, and so is any word that follows a colon. And then each line after the first line of the entry is indented. And for a blog citation, we have to note whether this is a web blog or a blog comment, and we put that in brackets. And then for any electronic source, you need a URL, and the words retrieved from are followed by the permalink to the source. All right, that's the basic reference list entry. Let's talk about the same types of things that came up with the in-text citations, the tricky ones. What if we don't know the author's last name or the date of publication? Let's pretend, for this instance, that we don't know the author for the article that we just looked at. So we move the article title to the front of the citation in place of the author's last name. And then all of the other information remains the same. We have our date, we have where we retrieved it from, the fact that it's a weblog, etc. And then if we knew that this information had come from an organization or a company, for instance, this blog post that we're talking about literally came from the Full Sail Writing Center, so we could actually say Full Sail Writing Center, the name of the organization, goes in place of the author's last name. Again, I just want to remind you guys, if you decide, if you don't have an author listed and you decide to go with the organization as the author, just make sure that that in-text citation and the reference list matches. I saw an example maybe 2 weeks ago where the student had done the in-text citation correctly and they had done the reference list correctly, but they had, in the in-text citation, they used the article's title instead of the author's name because they didn't have an author's name. And in the reference list, they'd used an organization as in place of the author's name. And the problem with that is I couldn't figure out which reference matched which in-text citation. It took me a long time. So you just want to make sure that your in-text citations and your reference list match. All right, so let's say in this example, the article has no date. Just like with the in-text citation, the place where you would have put your date, you put ND for no date. All right, so that is talking about how to cite ideas used in a paper. Let's now talk about, kind of switch gears and talk about how to cite media in a paper. For example, let's say we're in a photography class and our instructor asked us to find a photograph online and discuss its composition. We aren't including the image in the paper, we're just referring to the image. How do we cite that? If you're referring to a specific piece of media in your paper, you need to cite it in APA style using both an in-text citation and the reference sheet. This is a sample citation for an image. So the in-text citation would have the artist's last name and the year, and then the reference list will need all of this. You would also cite other media like videos, music, computer games, video games, movies, and TV shows if you refer to them in your paper. And there are specific rules for each of those types of entries. What if you are citing media used in a visual presentation? For example, an image or video taken from the internet that you want to include in a PowerPoint or a keynote. If you are reproducing an image in your presentation, you need to follow these 3 steps in order to cite it correctly. You have to check the copyright license to make sure that you actually are allowed to use the image. You need to include a URL on each slide where the image appears in the presentation. You can actually look at the bottom left of this slide for an example. Right above where the chalk would be placed on the chalkboard, there's a URL. And then you have to include a reference slide in APA style. This is our reference slide. This is an example. All right. How would we find these images? We sometimes get asked that. There are a couple of places that you can look for images. I'm actually going to, exit out of this and open up some of those. One place that you can look for images is compfight.com. This is a great place to search. I will give you this link in the chat in case you don't have it or you've never used it. What's nice about Compfight is they have a really good frequently asked questions. They will teach you about photo licenses, and then they just have a very wide range of different images. Another great place to look for images is actually on the at the library. If you go to the library and you go to the databases, Full Sail has purchased licenses so that students may use images from the Oxford Art Online and the APA or AP Images Online. Sorry, where are they? AP Images. This is collections from the Associated Press. So if you just log in here, you can search, you can find really awesome images. And again, because Full Sail pays so that its students have access to these. And then the other one to use is Oxford Art Online. You can come down here and again search in the databases. So both of those are really, really great places to look for images for presentations and things like that. And if you ever have any problems, the library is always super helpful on how to use the databases. All right, let's talk about some APA tips right now, just because we've kind of gone through a lot of information. And APA has a lot of very specific rules, and it can be hard to remember them all. So let's talk about some simple tips that can help you make sure you're citing properly. First and foremost, become familiar with the basic elements of an APA paper. That's what this session is about. That's what we want to provide you with. Now, the good thing is that if you feel like, oh my goodness, this is overwhelming and I'm not sure if I got all the information I needed, we record these sessions and then we post them on the Writing Center's page on Connect. So you can always go back and look at archived sessions and just re-familiarize yourself. Number 2, pay attention to your instructor's requirements. Is APA required for the assignment? How many sources do you need? Do you need to include an abstract? Third tip, always use the manual as a reference. Manuals are available in the library, and if you can't find a physical APA manual, here's the fourth tip. Always refer to an online APA resource. I will give you guys a couple of links. Actually, let me just pull them up. There are 2 resources that I use all the time. One is the Purdue OWL for APA formatting and style guidelines. I will put a link to that in the chat. The OWL goes into like tons and tons of really specific information. They have a sample paper that you can download and it explains all of the different parts. They have just a lot of really good information. I will say this about the OWL. Their information is incredible. It is also overwhelming. And sometimes it can be a little bit hard to navigate and find what you're looking for. So the second resource that I always tell students about, if I can spell today, is projectapa.info. This was actually put together by one of the English instructors here at Full Sail. And what I like about projectapa.info is, A, its design is much easier to use than a lot of the other online resources that you will see. And the other thing that the instructor did is they thought long and hard about the types of resources that Full Sail students use. And that's what they focused on. So APA or projectapa.info is not as in-depth as the Purdue OWL, but it is targeted for Full Sail students. So audiovisual media. This is one of my favorites. I come here all the time because when I was going to school, getting my degree, I did not often cite things like YouTube videos. My degree is in English literature, so I cited a lot of databases and a lot of books. But you guys use online videos, you talk a lot about films and music because those are the degrees that you're currently receiving. So this is one that I come back to time after time because I constantly forget what we need when we're citing a motion picture or what we need when we're citing an online video. And it's here. How do you cite a podcast? Well, she just showed you. So I really, really, really love projectapa.info because it is so tailored for Full Sail students' needs. So I would definitely recommend bookmarking both of those. And then, my fourth tip is, I'm on number 5 actually. Always check to see that formatting, in-text citations, and reference list entries match examples that appear in the manual or the online resource that you're using. After you've created your entries, you can go back and check them to make sure they match. Again, apa.info is a great place to do that. There's general formatting guides, so you can just kind of run through and make sure that your paper matches the sample paper. I think they actually have, yeah, there's, sorry, one second. Yeah, there's actually a document template just in case you're feeling overwhelmed by it, and then in-text citations and reference pages. My final tip is if you're in doubt about a documentation issue, ask your course instructor or make an appointment with the Writing Center. We are always here to help you guys. If we don't have the answer, we will help you find the answer. And everyone can use a second set of eyes on their work. For more information about the Writing Center, you can visit the Writing Center's the Writing Center on Connect. I'll actually show it to you guys really quickly in case you haven't seen it. If you search for Writing Center on Connect, this is us. We have a lot of great resources here. You can request an appointment online. You can come over here and you can read about the news. For instance, our library open hours are back on next week. You can see the events that we're offering. Tons of files on different kinds of help. So I definitely recommend using the Writing Center as well. All right, you guys, this is the time. If you have questions, let's open it up and you can let me know how you're feeling or if you have anything specific that I can help you with. All right. As you guys are thinking of questions, take your time. I'm not going to end the session immediately or anything like that. I do just want to let you know that this is a GPS workshop. So Carrie Ramirez presented or gave us some information at the beginning. So make sure that you stick around and just get the link to the survey that she will be posting in a couple of minutes. And then again, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat. I'll read them and answer them. If you don't have any questions, thank you so much for coming. And I am always here if you guys have any questions. You can email me at writingcenter@fullsail.com. Yeah, Carrie just posted the information for the GPS. Make sure you read through that. And then if you guys, again, have any questions, put them up in the chat and I will do my best to answer them. All right, we have a question that's asking about word choice in APA. I would say that it depends very much on what type of assignment you are doing, but usually when you are using APA, you're using research, you would want your word choice to be a little more formal or professional than maybe say like an email to your best friend. Oh, and I almost forgot. I want to give you guys those links to the title page and the hanging indent one. All right, the first YouTube link that I just put up there is for the title page creation, and the second one is for the hanging indent. So definitely bookmark those if you ever have lost points on your title page or your reference page, or if you just aren't sure how to do that. All right, guys, I am going to stick around for a little while. If you have any questions, again, throw them up in the chat. I am more than willing to answer them. If you don't have any questions, thank you so much for joining us. Make sure you get those links that we put up in the chat and have a really great weekend.